All right, welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andy Mack. Almost 6 o'clock here on the East Coast as day one of the Sean Diddy Combs trial wrapping up in New York City. We had the jury be seated, opening statements, and then some explosive graphic witness testimony early on. A live picture right now outside of the courthouse. We're awaiting any comments. We did see some of the family members for Sean Diddy Combs, the music mogul, leaving a short while ago. All right, let's continue on here on Live Now from Fox and bring into the conversation Fox 5 reporter Michelle Ross on the ground outside of the courthouse. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us. What can you tell us about what happened inside that courtroom today?
Well, the latest witness to take the stand today is a man named Daniel Phillips, and he was a male strip show manager. He would manage male strippers who would perform for things like bachelorette parties. But he said that he was paid to have sex with Cassie Ventura back in 2013 in a New York City hotel while Sean Diddy Combs allegedly sat in the corner, watched, and masturbated. This morning, his family entered the courthouse while leaving a black van. This includes his children, his sons, and also his twin daughters. His family has heard graphic allegations of the alleged sexual encounters, and his daughters walked out during that testimony. Phillips, the second witness of the day, said he was told by his boss that he was going to perform at a bachelorette party at the Gramercy Park Hotel, but when he arrived, he saw Cassie in red lingerie and a red wig. He testified she said that they would rub baby oil on each other and would see where things would go from there while her husband was there. Combs was allegedly in a corner in a white robe concealing his face with a bandana, but Phillips said he recognized Diddy's voice. He was paid a few $1,000s when he left. Phillips said this went on more times, meeting up at hotels or their homes, and Diddy would direct them while having sex. Now, a supporter of the alleged victims, Jaguar Wright, spoke out before court this morning.
I do believe there's going to be a lot of curveballs. I do believe there's going to be a lot of interesting things. And what I will say is, be vigilant. We're getting started.
Is this a reckoning for the music industry?
Oh, it needs to be. And if it wasn't, I hope my presence starts that.
Now, Phillips also testified that he witnessed Combs assault Cassie in their home and that he feared for his own life, but eventually befriended Cassie. Now, the person to testify before him was the hotel security guard who responded to the incident caught on surveillance video in that Los Angeles hotel back in 2016 when Diddy was caught on video assaulting Cassie. And he testified that Diddy threw a sack of money at him in their hotel room afterwards to keep quiet. That testimony resumes tomorrow with Daniel Phillips, and after that, Cassie Ventura is expected to take the stand. She is the prosecution star witness. We're live outside the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Michelle Ross, back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Michelle. And it's fascinating, some of those details inside. We're going to glean more of that in just a little bit. But I want to talk about the circus that is outside as well in New York City, familiar with major high-profile cases as well. Can you set the scene a little bit and describe some of the environment outside of this courthouse, because there are no cameras inside?
Right. No cameras allowed inside. It's mostly press that's behind me here, but already a line has formed for press and the public to get into the courtroom tomorrow. So I would say there are about maybe 3 dozen people. They have lawn chairs sitting out ready to get in and stay here overnight.
Oh, wow. That is impressive. Obviously, something we'll continue to follow. This 8-week-long trial expected to go day one wrapping up. Michelle Ross, I appreciate your time here on Live Now.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. All right, great stuff from Michelle there here on Live Now from Fox. As you can see, some of these sketches from inside of the courtroom, as some of these details are going to be graphic, and that we're warned some of the jurors about this here on Live Now from Fox, about all of these details. Let's continue our conversation about this here on Live Now from Fox and bring in to the conversation former federal prosecutor, friend of the program, Nima Rahmani. Nima, thank you so much for joining us here as day one of this trial, wrapping up a federal case accused there of sex trafficking and racketeering. The defense attorney during opening statement said, this Sean Diddy Combs is a complicated man, but this is not a complicated case. Is this a complicated case?
It is a complicated case, Andy, and we've been waiting for this day for a year and a half, and a lot happened today. We got our jury, we got through opening statements, and we're on our second witness. So let's talk about the opening statement. And it's interesting, not necessarily the substance, which I'll get into, but who delivered the opening statement. In a case that's about gender violence, we had two women deliver the opening statement. The prosecution is almost all women, so that's not unexpected. But you had Tony Garagos, Mark Garagos' daughter, who delivered the defense opening statement. And I think you really can see the defense perspective here, and the optics matter. You have a case that's about gender violence, and you have a relatively young attorney, certainly one of the less experienced attorneys on the team. She's certainly well qualified to deliver the opening statement. I think that's important. And one thing that she said, which I think is going to be a theme throughout the case, is obviously consent. We knew that. But a second big theme is the distinction between physical violence and sexual violence. We've all seen the 2016 video of the Intercontinental Hotel. All the jurors have seen that. So the defense had to take a position where they accepted responsibility for the domestic violence, the physical assault and battery. And I think that made sense from both a legal and a credibility perspective. You can't deny that that assault happened. And importantly, Diddy's not charged with assault or domestic violence in this case. Now, it is a potential RICO predicate act. So they may be stepping into those waters. But I think what they're trying to do is draw a line and say, listen, this was a mutually combative relationship, and it was toxic, and there was physical violence. But they're trying to draw the line and say there was no sexual assault and there was no rape.
Yeah, there's a good distinction and a good breakdown of some of the optics, because in the eyes of the jury, obviously, that is a big factor as well. We talked to people during jury selection. I want to ask you, because opening statements roll right into parts of the first witness and graphic details about that video. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. But it feels like devil is in the details, and the prosecution leaning into all of those graphic details about that. How is the prosecution using some of those very difficult to hear things, difficult to see things to their advantage?
Very difficult, Andy. And, you know, the defense is arguing consent and the prosecution is arguing sex trafficking. So what does sex trafficking require? Force, fraud, or coercion. So they're really leaning into that force. And their argument is this: no woman would consent to being drugged. No woman would consent to being urinated on, so much so that some of them even threw up during these freak-offs. So what they're trying to show is this is really beyond the pale and beyond anything any human being would consent to, because of course that is what the defense is arguing, that this was some freaky swinger lifestyle. And even though the jurors may not like it, there's nothing illegal about it. So the prosecution needs to rebut that and say this was all force. And I think those really graphic, disturbing details are maybe what carries the day at the conclusion of this case.
Yeah, that is so very true. And of course, one of the most poignant points of evidence they have is that video inside of that Intercontinental Hotel room back in 2016 of Sean Diddy Combs kicking Cassie while she was on the ground, coming around the corner. I think we've all seen that very closely. How key of a piece of evidence is that for the prosecution?
It is key. And if you're the prosecution or any trial lawyer in any case, you want to start out strong. That primacy and recency, that's something that you hear as a law student. So you want to start with your best evidence and your best witness. And we know the government star witness is Cassie, of course, but what they want to do is lay the foundation for that video. So that's why they brought in a current LAPD officer, a former security guard, who can lay the foundation for that video and can talk about the black eye that Cassie suffered and the fact that she wanted to leave and escape this freak off. And Combs reportedly offering him a bribe to cover it up. So I think it's a very important first witness to get that video in. In addition to the violence against Cassie, Combs broke a vase over in the hotel. So that's something that also shows the sort of violent streak, really erratic behavior, him sitting in a towel with just his socks on. So really disturbing and also graphic details by Florez, the first government witness. I thought he did well on cross-examination too.
Yeah, he said he had a devilish smile. That's what he said of Combs there after that incident back in 2016. And I want to ask you, because there was going to be cross-examination, we've already seen it with the defense trying to poke holes or talk about the credibility of it in terms of the bribe as well. How will that be a strategy for them to try to make it seem like these people aren't telling the truth? Because they also laid the foundation in opening statements about that everyone has a different motive, that people should look at those motives of what they say on the stand. How will the credibility factor be used by the defense?
It will be. And we know that this case is going to come down to credibility, not just the victims in the case, but all the government witnesses. And, from the defense team, it was Steele that cross-examined this particular witness. He, of course, really did an outstanding job for the defense in the Young Thug trial in Fulton County that really resulted in more or less a time-served deal and egg on the district attorney's face over there. So, during the cross-examination, they really focused on some of the things that Florez left out of that report. Andy, like you said, the devilish smile, that wasn't included in there. There was a male individual in the hotel room. Again, that wasn't included in the report as well. So what the defense is trying to do is cast doubt upon some of the elements that Florez was testifying about that didn't make its way into a report. And this is what good defense lawyers do. They just want to plant that seed of doubt, especially when you're talking about a security guard or a potential law enforcement witness. I think that's important, and I think the defense scored some points there.
Yeah, that is a very good point, talking about the credibility of this. And like you mentioned, some of those components of it. I do want to get into, because you mentioned the star witness is going to be Cassie when she takes the stand. She is also very pregnant in terms of this. We're not exactly sure when she's going to testify, but let's get into and preview that a little bit, because it's going to be fascinating that they need to be aggressive, but not too aggressive. How much of a tightrope is it for both sides?
It's going to be interesting because, again, you have someone who is going to be very sympathetic. She's a pregnant woman. She is a victim, admittedly, at least of physical violence. The defense is going to argue that she was not sexually assaulted. But I think you have to be careful, because if you're very aggressive, and obviously you want to do a good job for your client if you're a defense lawyer, you can really turn off the juror. So I think they're going to talk about some of the things that came up in opening statement, right? The jealousy, the fact that she stayed in this relationship for more than a decade. I mean, these are all the questions that the jurors are going to have. That's why the prosecution is going to try to bring in an expert witness that's going to talk about the psychology of an abuse victim, why someone might stay in a relationship, even though they're being physically and sexually abused. And of course, they're going to try to get her to admit that she too was violent with Combs and that this was a mutually violent relationship. Doesn't excuse it, doesn't make it legal, but it can explain some of the physical misconduct that we saw in that 2016 video.
Yeah, the force, fraud, and coercion point of it, they usually bring in the expert. And they also pointed already today that Cassie did leave this relationship with Sean Diddy Combs on her own, and they did eventually part ways. How powerful will that testimony from some of the experts in the psychology of this, a domestic violence survivor, a victim of this kind, how powerful could that be?
It's very powerful, and I've represented a lot of victims of physical and sexual assault, and I think jurors know, they bring in their real-life experience. I think everyone knows someone who is in an abusive relationship, and sometimes they don't have the strength to leave. So really the irony here is the defense is trying to build up Cassie and the other victims. They were talking about how they're strong, independent women who made these decisions voluntarily, right? That plays into that consent theme. The prosecution, of course, is going to talk about that psychology of abuse, that really she couldn't leave, notwithstanding all these terrible things that were happening to her. So there's sort of this fascinating dynamic where the defense is actually building up the victims to say that everything that they were doing was consensual and it wasn't psychological manipulation or force.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Of course, that video, it all comes kind of back to that video as you can see it directly in front of you, the jury can, about that domestic assault, even though this is a case about sex trafficking. I do want to ask you one of my last questions, because on Twitter, on social media, baby oil is trending. They brought that up again. That's going to be kind of the hot topic in terms of what we see in the media circus around the case. But it's about what's going on inside the case. Can you lay that out one more time for us? Because it's not about what we hear on social media, about what's going on in the media. It's about what's in the case, correct?
It is. And, everyone's talking about the baby oil, and it came up during Garagos' opening statement. She said there's nothing illegal. about, having a lot of baby oil. But baby oil is important to the allegations in the case because you saw Philip come and testify that Combs wanted Cassie covered in baby oil when he was filming them having sex. And, he would assault her and Philip would become uncomfortable, grab her by the hair. So we're really seeing what the government is saying with respect to the force element. Yeah, it's the case isn't about baby oil, but it's about Combs's manipulation and forcing Cassie Ventura to have sex under his terms, which included a lot of baby oil, allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly a lot of baby oil, a lot of memes, tweets about this coming up over the next several days. Nima, anything else? Because there was a lot of fireworks. It was 0 to 100 real quick today. Are we expecting the same for the next days and weeks ahead?
I do. This is a case that's going to be aggressive. It's going to be about cross-examination. And I think Cassie may take the stand as early as tomorrow, and there are going to be fireworks. I think one important takeaway, too, is we didn't know if victim number 3 would show up or testify. At least in their opening statement, the prosecution talked about a victim 3. So, obviously, if you're trying this case, you want more victims to tell the same story. So if indeed victim 3 shows up, I think that helps the government's case. So that was an important takeaway from today as well, because apparently, at least as of last week, she might have gone MIA or was having cold feet. Potentially.
Yeah, the mounting evidence and obviously mounting bits of testimony being seeded as this is expected to go 8 weeks or so in New York City. All right, Nima, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Great insight as always here on Live Now.